10,000, 20,000 people killed already. Frankly, they don't really care about that side of it. But
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how bad that ratio has to get until people think that, Israel is simply morally reprehensible in a way that they're not coming back from in anyone's lifetime now. You know,
yes, yeah, I mean, the thing I think about is
30
South
to
Africa,
40 to
because
50 to
South
1.
Africa got along. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, I said I was just, 30 to 1, 40 to 1, 50 to 1. Now, obviously, there's a mathematical limit. I mean, there are only so many Gazans and
2
Israel.
million.
But, yeah, it seems to me that, even defenders of Israel, the way that they talk about the U.S. and Israeli relationship is that it's extremely special, and that Israel really only has us in their corner. Now, I mean, well, you're an American by birth. We are a very big country, and we have a lot of clout on the world stage. So that you could say, oh, you've only got them as an ally, but that's a pretty major one. It counts for a lot.
Of course.
And yet, I mean, so in other words, they talk about this as if the U.S. is very odd in supporting Israel, and I say if we're that odd, maybe we're creating more problems for ourselves. I mean, just from a kind of more culturally neutral or utilitarian perspective.
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, there are many more Muslims. Why are we antagonizing them? You're right. Maybe they have an irrational Jew hang up, and fine, I acknowledge that, but hashing out the morality of that stuff, I'm all for domestically, but I just take it for granted that people have these biases on, geopolitically. And why do we support Israel so much if it creates these headaches for us?
Yes, a great question. I remember in the 70s or 80s, it was really quite common that certainly on the Republican side too, they'd say, there's so many more Arabs. They have the oil. I mean, why why would And so they attempted to have good relations with both. I think the problem for Israel now is there's a generational divide. The boomers are super pro-Israel, but
Yeah.
they're slowly dying off, and the younger people, you know, they see with all this kind of woke culture, they place Israel with white oppressor colonizer, into that category. And if you have these binaries of good and evil, that's now evil. Whereas with boomers, Israel's like good. You couldn't get anything better than Israel. So the other problem for Israel is, as time goes on, China, is going to take over as the global hegemon, and if they are going to need to come to terms with China at some point. They have good relations with Russia, relatively speaking, Israel and Russia, but at some point, America's not going to be the big boss anymore. It's going to be China, and Israel is going to, have to make a deal. And so 20, 30 years down the road, things are not looking good for Israel. Also, the rise of Iran, they're becoming much more powerful. And under the BRICS, the Muslim nations are becoming a little more unified. And they're not that unified yet, but they brought Saudi Arabia and Iran together. China has kind of brought them both into BRICS. And so the trends are not going in Israel's direction.
Now, I will say that India, I don't know how official this is, but India seems to be, at least by all the Indians and Indian American chatter that I see on Twitter, and you probably notice this too. Razib
Mm.
Khan talked about it as well. Not that he's Indian, Bangladeshi American, but they tend to be pretty supportive of Israel. Now, I don't know if that happens.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
hysterically. So no,
and they're
they're the kind of one.
quite a major player in
BRICS.
BRICS, so maybe it
Yes,
wouldn't.
yes, yes, yes. What China's trying to do now is to bring Pakistan into. I think a lot of the India's support for Israel comes from their hatred of Pakistan, or their kind of rivalry with Pakistan, and so they see the Palestinians as Pakistanis. Basically, they kind of, so they see themselves in the Israeli mold, fighting Islam. And so I think by analogy, that's why they support them. And so what it seems like China is trying to bring Pakistan into BRICS and to try to make peace between India and Pakistan, which is a very tall order.
Yeah.
And if they could manage that, that would flip India deeper into the BRICS, and because India still kind of like has a foot in the Anglo-Saxon camp, they're not completely bought
Yeah.
into the.
Yeah, there
Kind
are
of.
a tiny handful of Catholics out there. I've noticed. Not that I've been to India, but I work for an Indian company. I see a lot of Indian news and various websites and all that stuff. And yeah, they've got some Catholics. They got some old churches. Um,
Oh,
so yeah,
really?
I'm fascinated. But yeah, um, but yeah, I don't I don't internally India is just I would not want to live there. I mean, we think that we've got ethnic tensions, and we have some. They've got ethnic on top of religious, on top of probably
Yes.
just various local prides. And man, it's really ugly.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I've never been there, but I have friends who've been there. They really liked it, but
Yeah, I remember speaking about Israel and in India. Apparently, a lot of Israelis, until recently anyway, I think that's been put on hold. They would go to India and go to raves on the beach. Goa is a famous area out there. It's even
okay, yeah.
the motivation for a genre of electronic music called Goa trance. So, they've
Oh,
got some very Western-friendly party spots, and Israelis like to go there in India. So,
I know there's some kind of golden dome or something that a lot of like kind of more Western, how do you say? I don't want to say hippie, but kind of like new age type people go and study there. But
yeah, they study under various gurus. So
yes,
I don't know.
yes, yes.
I think it's all at least loosely Hindu based and Hindu inspired. I think that
Yeah,
term
yeah.
pretty much belongs to them. Another term
There's
I
something
see,
called
yogi, yogi,
like
and I don't know
mhm,
between a priest and a preacher. I don't know, but
mhm, mhm. There's like tantra. There's this kind of way
right.
of thinking, this philosophy, and so I know that's popular in the West. Probably more popular in the West than in India, actually. but
Yeah.
but um, but yeah, I mean, with Israel, you can see that India is clearly the majority are clearly on Israel's side, whereas with the Russia Ukraine, it was they were on Russia's side, very much so. So it
I
just
wonder
kind
what that
of
is. It's some kind of mix of just kind of abstract moral consideration, some mix of material incentives, some mix of just kind of
to me.
subconscious affinity, aesthetic matchup. Who knows?
I think they for whatever reason the Soviet Union was close to India
Right.
during the Cold War and supported India against Pakistan, whereas the West were more on the side of Pakistan, U.S. and Britain, and also because of the colonial past. So a lot of these kind of issues triggered anger within the ruling class of India. So they were really lashing out at the West in the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war. Um, but all that's pushed aside when it comes to Israel because it's more they see the analogy with Pakistan, and so that's more immediate. So yeah, you can see it on Twitter, and you know, it's can't miss it. They very much support Israel.
It's a bit of a black box to me is China's thoughts on Israel, and certainly even more mysterious their thoughts on Jews. What I mean, I because domestically, Americans just might actually think of them as somewhat similar in the sense that they see them as high achievers and they own businesses, and there may be sort of just a bit buttoned down in a way that a lot of Americans on the ground are not. And so, yeah, I mean, most people don't know many Asians or Chinese rather, and don't know many Jews. So, so I'm just kind of riffing on my domestic understanding of how that all might shake out. I'm trying to figure out what does China think about Israel/Jews.
If I could project from, I grew up in the Bay Area, so I knew quite a few. I went to Berkeley, so I know quite a few Chinese
Yeah.
Americans. And what they would say is they and the Jews are almost exactly the same. They see that they're almost like mirrors. they're not. I mean, there's differences obviously, but they really look at each other and see each other, and so they have a lot of respect for each other, and also competition. And so I would think China has a lot of respect for Israel, but they're taking a hard line with Israel because they're talking about a two-state solution on the 1967 borders, which is the UN, the official UN position. It's not that they're exaggerating China, but they're taking. Usually, the West will say two-state solution. They won't say the 67 borders. So I think China sees it all as a negotiation. At some point, Israel's going to have to come to China and say, "Okay, you're the new boss. We need your help. What do you need from us? Let's make a deal." And so, but I would say they respect each other. Because, like you said, they're both high achievers. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Of course, Jewish culture is not nowhere near as buttoned down. I mean, they're kind of, they're there.
There are definitely differences.
They're much more sort of, creative and liberal and decadent and all of that stuff. Just that's the cultural impression.
Or the culture, like the showmanship.
Certainly high achievement. Managed to fuse the two, kind of high-low thing.
Yeah, the Jewish culture, I suppose, is far more comfortable in kind of a showmanship kind of position, whereas Chinese is less comfortable in that. They're kind of more like, behind the scenes, very careful, kind of almost constricted in their expression. So, but that's one element of difference. But overall, I think that they probably look out for each other and understand each other and respect each other and see each other as worthy competitors, have respect for each other.
So, China's approach to Israel, unlike the U.S., they are, from what I gather, they think of them as simply another country to be managed. Whereas the U.S. thinks of Israel as this beacon of light and hope and shared values in the middle of hostile territory. It sounds to me like China's got the more pragmatic, utilitarian approach to this. Like, we respect you internally, but we can separate that. We can disentangle that from a kind of rational geopolitics.
Absolutely. Here's the thing: there's no kind of Holocaust guilt in China. Zero.
Right.
Right,
that's part of
in America, there shouldn't really be that much because America didn't do anything, but there is, and so there's kind of this I don't know, this kind of like need to protect Israel within America, kind of like defining them as victims, more at least for older Americans. Whereas in China, no, it's just another nation. And this is who was it? Is it Tucker? I'm trying to think. There was a right-wing thinker who would always say, "Why don't we care about Albania? Israel and Albania about the same size. They should have the same meaning to us, and yet they don't."
Yeah. I don't know who said that.
It's obviously exaggerated, but
maybe Pat Buchanan. Who knows? He's the kind of guy who would have said that.
I thought it might be Tucker. I don't remember. But yeah, China, they know they're an important country, but they also know that they need to show China some respect. And so right now there's a lot of information warfare. Attacking China for their treatment of the Muslims in that breakaway or that one area. So we're not there yet. But in 5 or 10 years, Israel's got to start doing some long-term planning, and the world's changing, and they need to make new alliances, just like Saudi Arabia has been doing. And so it's not going to be easy for them because now their whole reputation is getting shattered. It's kind of like going through the South Africa transition, where South Africa was just kind of another nation, and then at some point there was a big movement against what they were doing, and they became pariahs, and that's where Israel's tending towards becoming a pariah nation. They're not
Yeah,
there yet.
they're an odd ally because at this late date being in an alliance with a country that has an explicit ethno-religious foundation is unfashionable at the very least. And our Western European allies, say what you will about them, various criticisms, but they are not that. Australia is not that. New Zealand isn't that. None of the Commonwealth countries. Israel looks like an odd ally to have. It's because of it's very, very constitution, literally and sort of
Yeah,
figuratively.
it's an ethno state. That's why during the like 2016, all that time, there were a lot of discussions about Israel from the kind of more popular right, saying this is what we want. We want our own Israel,
Right,
but we
exactly.
can't have it.
Split on that because they want that. I don't agree with that kind of right. I guess I'm still kind of a boomer. I'm more of a civic NatCon.
These guys
Right?
were talking.
So I don't want to
Yeah,
see.
yeah, no. I mean, that's a more realistic thing. What these guys were just saying, America is not possible. I mean, what would have been possible in Sweden or some kind of more ethnic countries, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. But obviously, for America, it's more. I don't know if you know Steve Saylor. He's more
Yeah,
has more of a kind of a NatCon, basically.
yeah. I like Steve
You're
Saylor a
not going
lot.
to get
I
rid
think
of people that are citizens. So you just got to group around American citizenship. We're Americans. That's the grouping. And then the out group are the non-Americans, the outside. And we should be very careful who we let in. That's kind of his approach, which
Yeah, I
isn't
think
ethno.
he's kind of refreshing, and he's like the basically in the last 10 years or so we've seen come onto the scene stateside a lot of ideas of European conservatism, and then there are which would be sort of I don't know, borders. Well, I was about to say borders, language, culture, which that talk radio guy Michael Savage used to say all the time. But it's certainly very ethnically particular. A lot of the conservative European, rather European conservatism, relative to the U.S., which is more kind of abstract and propositional. And I know Saylor makes fun of propositional, but we are certainly more of that than a lot of European conservatism. And so, Saylor it will be thought of as this kind of anachronistic boomer con, but his approach still comports a lot with my own. And I think a lot of the right who is enthralled to some kind of Greco-Roman European form of conservatism, that's just kind of alien to me. It's just almost as alien and offensive as a lot of woke idpol. It's just not very American to me. So I appreciate his point of view. I think he has something more unique to us, but also not also distinguished from some kind of Cato Institute Heritage Foundation style thing too.
Well, those guys are, but they're libertarians, aren't they? Like the
Well,
Cato Institute.
the heritage, not really. Although on economics they are, but they'll speak more about kind of cultural problems, not always seeing that there's a relationship between the two. But at least with the Cato Institute libertarian people, they're not making the social conservative complaints. They like what capitalism does to culture as well. There's no tension there. But anyway, sorry.
Yes, because a lot of what we would consider cultural problems are obviously caused by capitalism. So this is what puts the right in a bind because they can
Yeah.
either concentrate on the cultural problems or on the capitalism. If they combine the two, they have to make a choice, and uh, so yeah. Um, but Yeah, so like Israel is an ethno state, but a lot of I mean like China's basically an ethno state.
Yeah, and
Uh,
we don't talk about them
Cambodia,
as if they have shared values either, but we do talk about Israel like we do.
yes, 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 yes. Um, and so kind of the rest of the world tend to be ethnos, but it's never you can never get any kind of purity. It just depends where you put the dividing line. There's always divisions, and you're always in groups and out groups. And it's just the kind of human condition. There's no getting around it, and so there's no. It's just developing empathy for others and understanding others and protecting yourself. Um, Finding that balance is the only way forward. And obviously, whatever group because an identity, you could have 5, 6 identities at the same time. They're all overlapping. It's all confusing. So you can't take any of it too seriously. Um, you
Yeah,
know,
I find it interesting that even supposedly parochial conservatism at this late date has become cosmopolitan. You have conservatives who think of having allies in Hungary or in Italy, although I think they're disappointed with the woman who took over there.
absolutely, very
So
disappointed.
they can
Very
already
disappointed.
name a bunch of places around the world where they have like compatriots and peers and people in at least spiritual solidarity with them. That was not American conservatism was not like that when I was younger, although American leftism was.
Yes, yeah, I see what you mean. Like the John Birch Society or something like that was very insular and
Right. It was like necessarily insular and inward looking. That's
yes,
like
yes.
defined conservatism. Like, I mean, that
The
was
only place where they would be in their anti-communism, that they could make kind of
that's true.
alliances outside, but they wouldn't. That wouldn't be a high priority for them because they would. Okay, the Saudis would, they're anti-communist as well, so there could be some friendship there. But generally, the John Birch side is not going to
Yeah,
care
that was
about
just
any.
a contingent kind of expedient thing for foreign policy. This is what we see now is different. I mean, these are just people kind of in a non-state of emergency, just in continual communication and just kind of they got each other's backs. It is a kind of cultural affinity in a way that was just
Yes,
foreign policy. Yeah.
this would be like a club of kind of nationalists. Certainly in Europe, America's always such a complicated.
International nationalism.
Yes, no, but there's like a coalition, a Europe of nations. It was Charles de Gaulle who came up with this concept, and so that it was a collective, but of groups, of nations. Each nation had its sovereignty, but they came together and worked together. Obviously, they have to have some compromises. They're not going to have perfect sovereignty, but he certainly didn't want to give up. The European Union is more of the imperialist model where you give up all your sovereignty to the higher level power. Um, where America, being the greatest power, they tended not to like nationalism because they just preferred people to, kind of get into the imperial system. Obviously, indirect imperial. America wasn't directly controlling anyone, but so definitely kind of nationalism, parochial nationalism wasn't encouraged by America internationally, unless like in Ukraine, it's like
Right.
then it's a different story. And so, because that nationalism was useful as a tool against first the Soviets and now the Russians, and so it kind of all depends.
Yeah,
And so,
occasionally it gets subnational. They'll be supporting the U.S. is supporting breakaway groups and terrorist groups, or they might not be on our terrorist list, but they are a terrorist to some. There some Kurdish
yeah,
groups come to mind. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
that was a kind of nationalism, Kurdish nationalism.
yeah,
Oh, and frankly, why not? I mean, they have a distinct culture and language, and so they want to be a group. Um, and so obviously they're in a bad location, spread out among so many countries that probably not going to happen. Um, but yes, and so it all comes down to kind of these ideas of universalism and particularism, and there's always kind of this dialectical tension between the two that never gets resolved. And so
yeah. It seems obvious to me that the international and ever expanding trajectory of capitalism, its logic is just
mhm,
making us more cosmopolitan and international. Just
absolutely,
by default.
absolutely.
It's just impossible to turn around, and even the people who are defenders of particularism have to accommodate it somehow.
Exactly. The only, the kind of only, this is the problem. Talking to friends, like this option between capitalism and communism, they're extremely similar. I mean, there's really no option. Uh, they're both, in capitalism, the means of production gets concentrated into the hands of the capitalists, and for communism, it's in the hands of the government, and so it's still concentrated. The kind of only way out is distributism, which is kind of the fragmentation of private property into like smaller groupings, into families or whatever. This is what Michelle Welbeck was talking about in Submission, and so that that's kind of like the middle way between the two, but you know, it's it's more of a idea than anything. And only under that could you start getting some kind of particularism. Uh, Although, yeah, I don't know. It's yeah, there's no easy answers, and so that's kind of one trend, one way to kind of resist like big capitalism and big communism is kind of this smaller kind of family, local kind of initiatives, but you can never completely escape bigger framework.
Yeah, there was a brief attempt, well, at least in the pages of a journal I liked reading 20 years ago. The journal was called Telos, and there were these dialogues, these back and forth between a paleo-conservative or paleo-libertarian named Lou Rockwell. You might have heard of LouRockwell.com.
Yes, yes, yeah.
And he was in his dialogue with a Marxist named Paul Pacone, and so the Marxist was coming in the direction of Lou Rockwell, and Lou Rockwell open to his doing that over a shared disdain for inhuman managerialism. So the Marxists was critical of the kind of advanced managerial state under capitalism and thought that moving toward localism was the way to go. And so Lou Rockwell was like, hey, that sounds great to me. Now I don't base any of my preference for that on Marxism, but you do you. And this is allows us to kind of break bread. I thought that was an interesting kind of approach that fused left and right.
If you read Marx, I mean, the one thing that comes, because I was a project manager in my professional life, and it's the thing I was thinking is this guy hates project managers because he just wanted no kind of organization, or he's like, I'm going to fish in the morning and sow wheat in the afternoon and herd cattle in the evening and write criticism. Obviously, there has to be some management, but a lot of Marxism was really a rebellion against managerialism.
Yeah, Paul Pacone, so, he drew on the Frankfurt School, Horkheimer and Adorno, in his disdain for managerialism, and it put him in contact with radical decentralists on the right. It's kind of fascinating.
No, it's there's a lot of anyone can have common ground. And so, particularly on the right, if you're more culturally oriented, because capitalism, capitalism, like the work, you become an abstract, either abstract worker or money becomes abstract. It's no longer linked to a country or to a manor or anything like that. And the worker doesn't have a citizenship or nationality. It's just a piece of labor. That's the most efficient way for to multiply capital, and so it attacks kind of all the things the right cherishes, like patriotism and nation and church, or none of that's just getting in the way of capitalism. And so but for most right-wing people, their only alternative, they think, oh, it's this communism, but I hate communism, which understandable, and so they're just stuck in this binary where they can see no way out.
Yeah,
so
the
one way out is just.
I think,
but there are problems
juxtaposing capitalism with communism of some kind of 20th century sort is it's a red herring.
Exactly.
That's not really what it is anymore. It would be some flavor of just simply regulating it much more, regulating capitalism and trade and consumption much more than a lot of conservatives are used to. That's all it needs to mean. And I would be supportive of something like that. I don't have every detail planned out, but I just think the kind of your God-given right to consume, even that which is really destructive to a lot of people. Maybe not you. Maybe you can handle it. I'm thinking of various consumer goods and everything from fast food
I
to
agree.
all kinds of
Oh,
stimulate pornography, everything. They ought to just
I
look at
agree a million
regulating a
percent.
lot more of that, and not just say, well, trade and contract and capital is sacrosanct. It just cannot be touched. Not even gambling. I just wish they'd say, yeah, it could. You can compartmentalize.
I mean, in the 50s and 60s, we were much more. During the Keynesian era, we
Yeah.
were much more regulated and controlled. Because, capitalists were totally in agreement because it helped them. It was in their interests. What happened is we became too wealthy. And so, just so capital just flooded to poor areas, China, basically. So, and now China's going to go through that same cycle. Uh, the thing is, they've read Marx, and so they're very well aware of these cycles and what's going to happen. So they're going to try to avoid the pitfalls. Um, Basically, what happens is in capitalism, you'll have one nation in charge, the leader, like the Dutch, and then they end up investing in their replacement. They invested in the UK, and then the UK took over. UK started investing like crazy in the US because that's where the profits were. And the Americans took over. And then starting in the 80s, 90s, we started investing in China. And now China is taking over. They're not quite there yet, but they're getting there. So now China's going to say, okay, we want to keep this here. So um, they're going to be very careful where they invest. Um,
Okay,
because they
well,
know the
we're at an
cycle.
hour now, and I think I'll let you go, Kevin. This was a good talk. Um,
Yeah, thanks. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it.